Broadcast live to 42 million viewers, Jasmine Crockett and Candace Owens stepped into what was framed as a debate, but it became a battlefield. The topic: race, justice, and the power of social movements. Within moments, it turned into a high-stakes showdown. One red folder, two damning revelations, and a line that split the nation in half. Crockett didn't just speak, she detonated. Owens didn't just stumble, she unraveled. What secret buried since 2018 was so explosive? It shattered a media empire in just 47 seconds. Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The hall was packed, not a single seat left. Spotlights burned down on a stage split in two, while cameras swung overhead, feeding a nationwide broadcast. Murmurs filled the air like static. No one was breathing easy. This wasn't just a debate, it was a political battlefield, live and loaded. At center stage, two podiums stood under a massive banner: Race, Justice, America. The crowd wasn't here for policy, they were here for war. Tonight's topic: racial inequality and the role of movements like Black Lives Matter in modern politics. Two women, two opposing ideologies, millions watching, and only one would walk away untouched. Candace Owens walked out first, flanked by a wave of applause from her corner. Her walk was slow, theatrical. She smiled, waved, and took her spot with the confidence of someone who believed she had the room won before the first word. She scanned the audience like a performer, judging her stage. "Let's get this over with," she whispered into her mic, smirking. Then came Jasmine Crockett, no words, no smile. She walked out like she was carrying a storm. Her eyes didn't blink. Her steps didn't slow. And in her left hand, she carried a red folder, sealed, worn, and unmistakably deliberate. She placed it on her podium like a loaded weapon. Her finger stayed on top of it, firm, unshaking. The room shifted. The crowd didn't cheer. They froze. Even the moderators exchanged nervous glances. Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes burned through the stage lights. And that red folder, thick, silent, daring, told everyone in the room one thing. She brought more than opinions. She brought evidence. And someone was going down tonight. And just like that, the silence didn't just break. It detonated. Candace Owens leaned into the mic like a predator tasting blood. Her voice rang out with surgical cruelty. Black Lives Matter isn't justice. It's a hustle. A business model wrapped in hashtags making millions off dead black bodies. The words slammed into the room like a wrecking ball. Gasps, applause, boos. Chairs shifted. One half of the audience erupted in cheers, the other half in disbelief. Candace smiled wider, like a match watching the fire it just started. She didn't stop. "The Democratic Party," she barked, "they created this chaos. They feed off racial division because they've got nothing else to offer. Divide, agitate, control. That's the strategy." Her hands sliced through the air, every gesture a weapon. A woman in the third row yelled, "Liar!" But another shouted, "Preach!" Security braced near the stage. Cameramen zoomed in. The energy in the hall had morphed from tension to near riot. And Jasmine? Jasmine didn't move, not even a blink. She stood there, still, silent, unreadable. But something in her jaw tightened. Her fingers curled slightly on the edge of the red folder, like she was holding back a storm. She didn't cut Candace off. She didn't rise to the bait. She waited, and that silence screamed louder than any applause. Then she spoke. No theatrics, just precision. "You want to go there?" Her voice was low but lethal. "Let's talk about what you said. Turning Point USA, 2019. You called Black Lives Matter a get-rich scheme built on blood. Your words, not mine." The room recoiled like it had been slapped. Owens blinked. Once. Jasmine stepped closer to the mic, eyes locked like crosshairs. "You want to talk about division?" Her tone dropped colder than steel. "Division doesn't come from injustice. It comes from the people who deny it, distort it, and cash in on the silence." She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Every word hit like a gavel. Dead silence followed. Even the light seemed to dim. Candace looked rattled, but forced a grin. Too late. The crowd was no longer split. It was shifting. Jasmine hadn't raised her voice, but somehow she'd just stolen the room. And that red folder, still unopened, still waiting, like a promise or a threat. But Candace wasn't finished lighting fires. She was just striking the next match. She leaned in with icy confidence, voice rising like a hammer. "Let's deal in facts," she snapped. "Black Americans are 13% of the population, but commit over 50% of violent crime. That's not racism, that's math." Gas rippled through the room. She pointed across the stage at Jasmine, her tone sharp as glass. "You can chant all day, but numbers don't lie. Black Lives Matter hasn't changed a damn thing." The crowd split. Cheers from one side, stunned silence from the other. Jasmine didn't flinch, not even a twitch. She simply pressed a button on her podium. The room darkened as a massive screen behind them came to life. No music, no narration, just data. Raw, ruthless, impossible to ignore. One chart after another. Income gaps, rejection rates in job interviews, graphs showing unarmed black men gunned down by police at 3 times the rate of white men. The numbers moved like a second heartbeat, cold and relentless. The applause died. She stepped forward, her shadow stretched tall across the screen. "You want numbers? I'll give you numbers." Her voice was low, tight, cutting like wire. Another click, and George Floyd's face filled the screen. His daughter's quote appeared beneath it. "Daddy changed the world." Jasmine let it sit, let it burn. Then came the footnotes. American Civil Liberties Union reports, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People Studies, pages of hard evidence showing systemic bias at every level, jobs, courts, schools, survival. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. "The truth," Jasmine said, her eyes locked forward, "doesn't live in spreadsheets. It screams in morgues. It begs in courtrooms. It weeps at funerals." Her hand clenched the microphone. The lights from the screen flickered red across her face, like a warning flare. "Statistics won't show you how it feels to watch someone die on camera and still hear people ask if he deserved it." Then she turned, slowly, deliberately, staring straight at Owens. "Tell me this," she said, every word a nail. "When a white man commits a crime, he's troubled. But when a black man does the same, he's proof. One gets therapy, the other gets a body bag. Why?" The crowd didn't breathe. A full second passed. Then two. Candace's smirk cracked. Her eyes darted. Her lips moved, but no sound came. She looked down. For the first time that night, she looked small, like the fire she started was getting too big to control. And Jasmine? Jasmine hadn't even opened the red folder yet. And just when everyone thought Jasmine had delivered her hardest blow, she reached for the detonator. She raised one hand, slow and deliberate, like a conductor commanding silence. "I'm requesting a 30-second pause," she said, her voice cold and composed. The moderator froze. The tech crew looked up. "With permission," Jasmine continued, eyes locked on Candace, "I'd like to share a moment from 2018. Just for context." The moderator, sensing something seismic, gave a hesitant nod. Jasmine pressed a button, and the lights dimmed like a storm cloud moving in. Then the screen lit up, and time stopped. There stood Candace Owens on stage, years younger but unmistakably confident, speaking to a packed crowd. The clip played unedited, untouched, undeniable. "If Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine. The problem is he had dreams outside of Germany." The sentence landed like a gunshot. Audible gasps ripped through the crowd. One woman covered her mouth. A man stood up, stunned, then slowly sat back down. Even Owens's supporters looked frozen, betrayed by the words now echoing across the chamber. The camera panned the audience. Shock, horror, disbelief. Faces that once smiled now drained of color. Candace exploded. "That video was taken out of context," she screamed, her voice cracking under pressure. "That's not what I meant. This is manipulation." Her hands trembled as she gripped the podium like it was slipping from beneath her. "You know exactly what you're doing. she yelled, desperation creeping in with every breath. Jasmine didn't move. She stepped toward her mic like she was stepping through smoke. Context, she repeated, her voice steady as steel. The context is this. Silence when we needed truth the most. Her words didn't shout. They sliced. The room dropped into absolute stillness. No one clapped. No one coughed. The clip looped once more behind her, like a ghost refusing to leave. And in that moment, it was no longer a debate. It was exposure. And Candace Owens was unraveling. Live. But Jasmine wasn't done. The video was just the spark. What came next would be the explosion. With the whole room still spinning from Candace's Hitler quote, Jasmine moved, but not quickly. She reached down, slow and deliberate, and lifted the red folder from her podium. It was the same one that had sat there like a loaded weapon from the start. Waiting. Her fingers gripped it tight, the red cover catching the light like a warning. The crowd went dead quiet again. You could hear the pages sliding as she opened it. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm was louder than any scream. I've sat through a lot of noise tonight, Jasmine said, holding up the first sheet of paper. But now, let's talk about receipts. She walked toward the edge of the stage, holding the page in one hand, and clicked the remote in the other. The big screen behind her lit up, not with opinion, not with slogans, but with hard numbers. The first slide showed 4 years' worth of payment records, wire transfers, consulting invoices, deposits from anonymous holding companies, all tracing back to one source. The name of the foundation appeared in bold, a powerful right-wing organization that had already been investigated twice for funding white nationalist content and anti-Black Lives Matter campaigns. Jasmine let the logo hang in the air. The crowd recognized it. So did the press. These payments, she said, pointing to the totals, total over $1 million, sent to Candace Owens through backdoor channels. Year after year, from a group publicly accused of targeting Black voices, spreading racial fear, and fueling division. She looked up. That's not coincidence. That's business. The audience murmured again. But it wasn't confusion anymore. It was realization. Even the people who'd clapped for Candace earlier now shifted in their seats. Journalists scribbled. Cameras zoomed. Candace didn't speak. Her hands gripped the podium tighter. Her face had gone still. Jasmine took another step forward. And if that's not enough, she said and clicked the remote again. The screen changed. A corporate email appeared in full view. Jasmine didn't read it out loud yet. She let the room see it for themselves. The header was clear. The sender and recipient, both high-level executives inside the very same foundation. The body of the email was short, only a few lines. But the subject line was a death sentence. Keep race tension high. Candace is our best voice. It hit like a bomb. There was no noise at first, just stunned silence. Then someone in the front row let out an audible breath, like they'd been punched in the gut. Another person dropped their phone. People turned to each other, whispering in disbelief. On screen, the words stayed frozen, cold, permanent. Jasmine looked up. Her voice now dropped into something even more dangerous than anger, controlled disappointment. This isn't about party or policy. This is about power, sold to the highest bidder. This is about someone who claims to speak for the Black community while being paid to tear it apart from the inside. She paused. This is not about politics. It's about profit. It's about selling division as a brand and making millions while people bleed in the streets. Candace still hadn't moved. Her hand, now visibly trembling, lifted halfway, like she was going to respond. But she couldn't. The words weren't there. She looked from the email on screen back to the crowd and then to the moderator. But no one was saving her now. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Her entire body was frozen, like her mind couldn't catch up to what had just been exposed. The fire she had been stoking all night had turned, and now it was swallowing her whole. And then, piercing through the tension like a bullet. Shame! A voice from the back row. Raw, loud, human. The word echoed across the room like a final verdict. The room exploded. Some stood in shock, others sat frozen, unable to believe what they just witnessed. Reporters scrambled. Phones were raised. Even the moderators looked stunned. And in the middle of it all, Candace Owens stood alone, cornered, exposed, shattered. And Jasmine? She simply closed the red folder. Quiet, complete, done. The collapse had begun, but Owens wasn't ready to accept it. Her voice cracked the silence like shattered glass, loud but shaky. "This is a setup," she barked, breathless. "That email doesn't prove anything. I don't control what donors say. This is political theater." She motioned frantically toward the screen, as if she could somehow scrub it clean just by pointing. But her voice wasn't landing like it used to. It wobbled. Her words didn't echo. They fell flat. A few in the crowd murmured, but most just watched, eyes narrowed, waiting. Then with surgical calm, the moderator cut through her unraveling defense. He leaned slightly forward, his tone firm, steady, final. "Ms. Owens, please respond to the documents. Not speculation." It wasn't a request. It was a warning, one that told the whole room the circus was over. Facts were on the table. And excuses? No longer welcome. Candace froze mid-sentence, blinking fast, jaw tense. It was like the gravity in the room had shifted, and now it was all pressing down on her. She looked to the moderator, then to Jasmine, then to the screen, but the email still hung there like a guilty verdict carved in stone. The words, "Keep race tension high. Candace is our best voice," glared back at her, brighter, louder, more damning with every second she stayed silent. Behind her eyes, the panic was undeniable. She knew what was happening, not just in this room, but everywhere else. And what she feared most was already starting. From the VIP rows, one by one, familiar faces turned cold. A former senator she had once endorsed now sat with arms crossed, jaw tight. A political strategist she'd co-hosted panels with just shook his head and looked away. Even her own communications director stared down at her phone, refusing to meet her gaze. This wasn't strategy. This was survival. And her allies, those she had once proudly stood beside, were now vanishing into the shadows. And Jasmine hadn't moved an inch. Her face held no grin, no arrogance, no celebration, only precision. Still as stone, she watched Candace unravel not with glee, but with quiet certainty, like a surgeon watching the final heartbeat of a failed lie. She stepped toward the mic, not slowly, not dramatically, but purposefully. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't twist the knife. She just said what needed to be said. "We don't need anyone perfect. We just need someone who doesn't sell the truth." And with that, she stepped away from the podium. No applause, no fanfare. Only the sound of a legacy falling apart behind her. The lights had faded. The debate stage was empty. But for Candace Owens, the aftermath was just beginning. And it came like a landslide. In less than 48 hours, her name turned from headline to hazard. Networks that once fought to put her on air were now erasing her from their schedules like she was a bad memory. Television contracts were terminated without warning. Podcast invitations vanished. Syndicated shows she once anchored went silent. One by one, media companies released sterile, calculated statements. "We are suspending future collaborations pending internal review." Others didn't bother with explanations. They simply pulled the plug. Her presence became a liability no brand wanted to touch. She tried to get ahead of the storm. From a dim room with no studio lighting, Candace recorded herself against a blank wall, dressed down, voice carefully softened. The camera shook slightly. It was raw, but not in the way that felt real. "I want to apologize if my words cause pain," she began, eyes flickering between lines on a screen in the lens. "My intention was never to divide, but to elevate hard conversations." She paused as if waiting for sympathy to return. It didn't. Online, the backlash was instant and merciless. The comments section exploded. "Too late. You took the money. You don't get to play victim now." Thousands reposted clips from the debate alongside side-by-side screenshots of the financial documents and her tearful apology, calling it the collapse in 3 acts. Her attempt to reclaim the narrative wasn't just rejected, it was ridiculed. Every word was picked apart, every blink seen as calculation. But the harshest blows didn't come from strangers. They came from the people who once stood behind her. A former conservative lawmaker she had campaigned with tweeted bluntly, "I stood by Candace when it was hard. But this is indefensible." A well-known black conservative influencer, once a close ally, posted, "She didn't get exposed. She got revealed." Even a civil rights foundation she had proudly quoted in past speeches issued a statement. "We unequivocally condemn Ms. Owens' collaboration with networks built on hate, fear, and misinformation. No press team, no PR firm, no political strategist could spin what happened next." The cancellations weren't quiet. They were public, coordinated, and irreversible. And in the space of a single week, Candace Owens went from star commentator to outcast. The industry she had once dominated now viewed her as a cautionary tale. The message was clear. The fall wasn't because she stumbled. It was because she cashed in while others bled. While Candace Owens was drowning in silence and scandal, Jasmine Crockett rose, not with noise, but with purpose. And in the wreckage of that televised battlefield, a new voice emerged that no one could ignore. People didn't just see Jasmine as the woman who won a debate. They saw her as something far more dangerous to the status quo, a force of truth that couldn't be shaken. She hadn't thrown punches or played dirty. She hadn't shouted to be heard. She had stood her ground, folder in hand, facts like knives, and dismantled an entire persona built on performance. What made her unforgettable wasn't just what she exposed, it was how calmly, how methodically she made the lies collapse under their own weight. The response was immediate and relentless. She was invited to speak at dozens of universities, often greeted like a headliner on a sold-out tour. From Harvard to Howard, students stood in lines stretching around buildings, holding signs that read, "Truth doesn't flinch." Some cried when they met her, some handed her letters, but all of them listened. At community forums, at social justice summits, even on primetime broadcasts. Jasmine didn't just appear. She dominated. Hosts fell silent when she spoke. Opponents backed down before she even stepped up. In a world addicted to volume and outrage, her calm became her weapon. Her precision became her shield. And slowly, a name began to stick. Not created by her team, not branded by consultants, whispered online, printed on posters, written in classrooms. The truth whisperer. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't need to scream. She didn't need to posture. She simply told the truth and made every lie around her go quiet. But Jasmine's impact didn't end when she walked off that stage. If anything, that was only the trigger. What happened in that room, what was said, what was shown, didn't just ripple, it roared. The footage of Candace Owens being dismantled piece by piece, the red folder opening like a courtroom exhibit, the damning email flashing across the screen like a bullet. It all moved faster than anyone expected. It wasn't just a scandal, it was a spotlight, a brutal, unforgiving light that exposed something much darker than one woman's hypocrisy. It became a message, a warning, a shift in the national air. No one, no matter how famous, how polished, how protected, gets to rewrite the truth and sell it like gospel. In the days that followed, it was no longer just about Candace Owens. Her name was still everywhere, yes, but now it was being used in sentences like, "We need to make sure we don't have another situation like Owens." Her face wasn't just in headlines. It was in internal memos, executive emails, donor spreadsheets. People had seen what unchecked influence and hidden funding could create, and suddenly everyone wanted distance. Major nonprofits and political coalitions launched urgent internal reviews. Board members convened in closed-door meetings, asking questions they had once been too comfortable to ignore. Who are we funding? What voices are we elevating? What if they're being paid to say what we want to hear? Civil rights organizations, including several Candace once name-dropped in speeches, went into damage control mode. Some released statements reaffirming their commitment to transparency. Others quietly removed names from advisory boards. Public relations firms fielded calls from clients panicking, not about lawsuits, but about reputations. In an era where perception was everything, association with even the shadow of deceit had become a financial liability. But the tremor didn't stop at institutions. It hit the public square like lightning. The debate that exploded across America wasn't about one person. It was about the line, the dangerous, often blurred line, between free speech and monetized manipulation. Jasmine hadn't just exposed financial corruption. She had torn the curtain off a game that many suspected, but few could ever prove. She showed what it looked like when conviction wasn't real, when someone's loudest beliefs had a price tag hidden behind them. Town halls erupted with new questions. Commentators who once defended Owens shifted tones or went radio silent. Talk show hosts asked their panels, when does influence stop being a right and start being a product? At universities, students led open forums titled Speech versus Strategy, The Ethics of Platforming Voices and Movements. Some argued for nuance, saying Candace had simply made a mistake. Others called that naive, even dangerous. One student stood up and said, if you're paid to divide, you're not a commentator. You're a contractor. The room erupted in applause. The tension was no longer partisan. It was existential. Conservatives worried about infiltration. Liberals worried about trust. Moderates worried they'd miss the signs. But all sides now shared one uncomfortable truth. Anyone with enough money could manufacture a movement. Candace Owens had been the face of fearless truth until she wasn't. And what Jasmine had proven was that the truth doesn't need theatrics. It just needs proof and the courage to present it. Networks, still reeling from the backlash, began revisiting their guest lists. A silent blacklist began to circulate, not officially but undeniably. Producers started asking their booking teams not just, are they popular, but are they real? The fallout was systematic, strategic, ruthless. The industry had tasted the cost of backing someone without due diligence, and no one wanted to be the next example. But the most dramatic change wasn't in media or nonprofits or universities. It was in the audience, in voters, in students, in people who had once blindly trusted the strongest voices in the room. Now they weren't just listening, they were asking, they were demanding. Where is this message coming from? Who's paying for this platform? Is this passion? Or is this payroll? That was the real legacy of what Jasmine did on that stage. She didn't just call out a lie. She reset the stakes for what truth looks like. She made silence suspicious. She made slickness suspicious. She reminded the country brutally and without apology that the loudest voice in the room isn't always the most honest one. Sometimes it's the most rehearsed. And slowly, something began to shift in the national psyche. It wasn't that people suddenly distrusted every activist or speaker, but now there was a filter, a sharper lens, a demand for receipts before reverence, a hunger for real truth, not the kind printed on t-shirts, but the kind that survives cross-examination. The kind Jasmine Crockett brought in a red folder. She never said, this changes everything. She didn't have to, because after that night, everything already had. The storm had passed. The damage had been done. The names, the headlines, the collapse. It was all behind her now. But Jasmine Crockett understood something that most people don't. Real justice doesn't end when the cameras turn off. Sometimes it begins right there, when the world isn't watching, but history still is. For days she stayed silent, not out of fear, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she wanted the silence to be heard first. The same silence that had let lies spread. The same silence that had protected power, buried truth, and handed microphones to those who used them like weapons. That silence had ruled too long, and Jasmine was about to end it, for good. She didn't walk into a studio. She didn't sit for a morning show. She chose a single empty room, no fanfare, just a black wall, a single chair, and a fixed camera lens waiting for a voice that wasn't rehearsed, but real. There were no crew members, no spinning graphics, no swelling music, just stillness and truth. Jasmine stepped into the frame like she was stepping into a verdict. No notes, no script, no armor, just presence. She looked into the lens not like a politician, not like a celebrity, but like a witness. Someone who had seen too much, survived too much, and could no longer stay quiet. Her expression was unreadable, not angry, not broken, but dangerously clear. She let the silence hang. 10 seconds. 20. Long enough for discomfort to settle. long enough for the viewer to realize this wasn't just a clip, it was a reckoning. And then she spoke, slowly, sharply, unshakably. Justice is not a trend. Truth is not negotiable. And silence is no longer an option. She didn't blink. She didn't soften the blow. She let the words slice through the quiet like a blade. The sentence didn't just land. It settled into the bones of anyone listening. It wasn't a slogan. It wasn't designed for applause. It was the kind of sentence that exposed people without naming them, that made defenders of the dishonest squirm in their chairs, that forced a pause, a real, painful pause, for anyone who had ever kept quiet when it mattered most. And that was the power of it. Jasmine wasn't speaking at anyone. She was speaking into a void that had protected far too many for far too long. Because she knew the truth. Silence isn't neutral. Silence isn't safe. Silence is a choice. And in the hands of the powerful, it becomes a weapon just as deadly as any lie. That night on stage, Jasmine had exposed one person. But this was aimed at every person who had ever looked the other way. Every institution that prioritized comfort over accountability. Every influencer, every leader, every voice with a platform who had stayed quiet. Not out of ignorance, but out of convenience. And the world noticed. Clips of the video spread like wildfire. Not because they were scandalous, but because they were clean. Free of politics, free of theatrics. Just one woman, a dark background, and 3 sentences that hit harder than any campaign ad. People didn't repost the video because it was dramatic. They reposted it because it made them look inward. It made them uncomfortable. It made them remember moments when they too had chosen silence. And that, more than anything, was Jasmine's victory. She hadn't just taken down a figure. She had taken down an idea. That power could rewrite facts as long as no one dared to challenge it. And when her words landed, they didn't just stay in news feeds. They entered classrooms, courtrooms, city halls. Posters went up with her quote printed across them, t-shirts, flyers, murals. Justice is not a trend. Truth is not negotiable. And silence is no longer an option. But what made it all matter wasn't the echo. It was the aftermath. Because those words carried teeth. They started conversations that weren't comfortable but necessary. They forced networks to reevaluate what kind of voices they gave airtime to. They triggered investigations into dark money funnels that had funded narratives for years. They pushed young activists to ask harder questions, not just of others, but of themselves. And Jasmine never claimed credit. She didn't go on a victory tour. She didn't sell merch. She didn't monetize the moment. She simply let her words do what they were meant to do, hold the line. Because at the end of the day, she wasn't trying to be a brand. She was trying to be a mirror. And mirrors don't blink. She didn't post daily follow-ups. She didn't capitalize. She just kept doing what she'd always done. Show up, prepared, precise, unbothered by noise because she'd already faced worse. The power of that final moment was that it felt like a closing statement, not just to a chapter, but to a way of doing things. The kind of moment that tells people, this stops here, right now, in front of you, and it forced a hard truth onto the table. Anyone who uses silence to shield what's wrong will be shattered by what's right. Not always immediately, not always publicly, but eventually, and inevitably. Because truth has no expiration date. It doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs one voice brave enough to speak it. That's what Jasmine Crockett became in that final frame. Not a politician, not a viral clip, but the quiet, steady voice that told the whole country, you don't have to be loud to be heard. You just have to stop being silent. And with that, she stepped out of frame, not with applause, but with impact. A kind of impact that doesn't fade. It echoes. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.